welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to our virtual craft chat with Jen Givhan, where we talk to authors a little bit less about what they wrote and a little more about how they wrote it. So, Jen, I would love it if you would start by reading a little bit of Soft Bones, so those of you who have not yet had the pleasure of diving in can see what you have in store.
Yay. Okay, so I'm going to read to you from the prologue. And this is the Salton Sea, California, Southern California, where I grew up. Thick, noxious air burns her throat as she flees through the fields, mud clotting to her soles like leeches. One untied shoe after the other over the rutted vegetables. She shouldn't run toward the water. It isn't safe. But the murk would offer cover. She doesn't risk a glance behind her or fumble at the yellow onions bulging from the ground. At first, it's the familiar stench of sulfur bubbling from deep in the earth, mangled with the smell of rotting fish. Thousands of carcasses gurgled onto the brackish marsh just ahead. Then, something intoxicatingly sweet fills her nostrils. She's not near the sugar plant on the other side of town, but those sugar beets smell like overripe dirt anyway. This is more like walking into the donut shop at sunrise and ordering a maple bar and sweet tea. She shakes her head, sure her blood sugar's collapsing from starvation and dehydration, and she's about to nosedive into the fields when the sweetness sours just as suddenly as it came, and she's overtaken by the dank stench of sweat and shit. Her heartbeat throbs in her ears, eclipsing the sound of a truck engine's roar, another predator in the night, tearing through the furrows and ruining the crops, chasing her. Would anyone hear her if she screamed? She can't waste the breath she needs for running. In the distance, golden lights twinkle, a mythical city arisen in the nowhere between the closest towns, neglected or desolate, and the still living, breathing town where her people are. But the lights aren't magical, and they're far, much too far. She'd never outrun the truck to get to the geothermal plant, where someone at the gate might hear her, let her in. But would they believe her if she told them who was after her? A few hundred feet ahead stands a dock, rickety and slanted, but still possible cover. She could jump into the frothy, stinking water, hold her breath, and hide beneath the battered, salt-crusted planks. Her pursuers might assume she's darted toward the wildlife preserve, climbed the chain link, or drowned. The fug of gasoline and exhaust commingles with the acrid sea, fertilizer, her own sweat and spit and her blood, pumping, pumping furiously. Her lungs scream, "Don't let me die out here." The sky lights a purple path upward, the Milky Way beckoning as if someone's holding a flashlight behind a pinpricked cosmic bedsheet. It cascades across the expansive blackness that blurs into the jagged peaks of the chocolate mountains beyond this stretch of desert that's claimed countless lives. The clomping of hooves and a blaze of headlights pierce her back. Her dark hair flaps crow's wings against her sweat-drenched hoodie as her high tops slip against the mud. There's nowhere to hide, no tree cover, nothing but shrubs and dirt, and the green fingers of onion bulbs wavering, the hands of the dead, reaching for her, grabbing, pulling her downward. She falls to her knees, blackening her hands with soil, but the creature canters steadily toward her. She scrambles up, the Salton Sea in sight, a soupy bog in the darkness. Her feet crunch fish bones and the minuscule shells of dead crustaceans. Millions of them crackle beneath her while she flies toward the pier, stretching into the abandoned lake, all that accidental water sloshing for miles across the dusty bowl of Valle, before the headlights overtake her, and the horse-headed woman cackles, her midnight black mane scraggling down her bare back. For a moment, she is glowing yellow, gleaming with beads of sweat, saintly. Then the gunshots resound. 1, 2, the deafening booms reverberate through the mountains, aerial drills, only this is no drill. Following the shots, metal clanks its sick click, click, boom, click, click, boom. If anyone were out here but the night animals, the stars, they've shut their eyes. They haven't seen a thing. They haven't said a damn word to anyone. Thank you.
It's okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. All right, we're going to start off with a standard writer-centered question, Jen. In your own words, who the heck are you?
So I am a mama writer. I mother my kids and write my books in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm originally from the Imperial Valley in Southern California, right next to the Salton Sea, where Salt Bones takes place. Lived here in New Mexico for about 15 years. I'm a poet and novelist with 11 published books across those genres over the past few years, with another on the way from Mulholland Little Brown. The Sleeping Sisters comes out next summer. I'm very excited about that one. Just finished revisions, sent them to my editor today. So we celebrated by going to Denny's. That's about it.
Wow, congratulations. Um, okay, let's jump in about salt bones. So this is a very complex story. You've got nuanced relationships among family, community members that go back years. So how did you see the story's arc? And I can leave that there, or I'm going to give you another piece. So the book jacket, the dust jacket, talks about it as a retelling of Persephone and Demeter. And if you don't remember your mythology, people, it's a good one. But I want to know if um, yeah. So is that the way you see the arc, as a Demeter and Persephone? And I'll be quiet now.
So this novel started originally as a short story called Salt Bones. And it was about a brother and sister growing up on a toxic lake. And that's as much as I knew. I had about a page and a half, or maybe about 2.5 pages, and it just hadn't gone anywhere for several years. I went home to the Imperial Valley, which I call El Valle in the novel, and because it's predominantly Latino and Indigenous, as I and my family are as well. And my good friend there told me that the Salton Sea is drying up and releasing toxic chemicals into the air. And as that happens, these chemicals like DDT and arsenic, lead, all of these things that came from the pesticide use in this farming community, which brings in $1 billion in revenue for California every year, but most of the people there live under the poverty level. And so now all of these toxic chemicals are going into the air and then being breathed into the lungs of the community. There were advocates who went up to Sacramento and had, asked for help, and had overheard politicians saying things like, well, no one lives down there anyway. So my friend told me this and said, if nothing's done, it's going to become a ghost town. Like, our hometown will become a ghost town. And I thought, I need to do something. I'd also just recently seen the Salton Sea on a show that aired several years ago. It was called Abandoned America. And so all of this came together in a kind of a sopa pot inside of me. And I pulled out this story and I thought, okay, I need to tell the story of my hometown from this place of the land, the environment, how it affects the people, how the politics, the socioeconomics, the agriculture all come together. But I'm not a journalist. I'm a poet and a novelist. And so I had the story of the brother and sister. And at the same time, I also had gone to pick up my daughter from school. And I'm sitting there in the line waiting for her. And she doesn't come outside. All the other kids are getting into their cars and everyone's driving away. And I'm increasingly freaking out by the second. Fast forward several minutes, and I'm having a full-on anxiety attack, texting her, calling her. She comes out with a few other students. It turns out their teacher had kept them after class and hadn't let us know. And so in that, 5 minutes where I almost died of fear and anxiety, I was ready to burn down the entire world to find my daughter. And so these components all came together then, not so much in an arc for me. That's not necessarily how I think in terms of story, probably because I come from a poetry background. So for a long, long time, I was in this place that I call the underbelly. And I say for a long time, that's several years worth of time that I was in the underbelly. And so I had planned out a story. I had okay. I had plotted it out, but it wasn't coming together. So I had this main character who was a mom, but I had several timelines going on. And I went back to her childhood growing up in the Salton Sea in its heyday, because in the 1950s and 60s, this was a really hopping place. And like celebrities would come. It's about an hour south of, about half an hour to an hour south of Palm Springs. And celebrities would come and go sailing and fishing and golfing down there. Like Desi Arnaz frequented the place. Families would come out, but then there was a series of hurricanes that destroyed, like flooded, and then destroyed the all of the surrounding towns. And so it just kind of deteriorated away into its current state. And then environmentally, it is just deteriorated even more. And so I went back into the heyday, and I was trying to work out a story there, but it was sort of coming out young adult-ish, and that really wasn't what the heart of the story was. And I was like, okay, I need to get to the mothering aspect of this. My agent actually read a draft, 150 pages of all of this, the brother and sister growing up on the Salton Sea. And she said, okay, you have a little bit of it in the current time, like in our contemporary time, when the Salton Sea has already been destroyed. That's where the story is. That's where the energy is. That's where it's pulsing. And I thought, yes, absolutely. And so I took that 150 pages of the underbelly, really, and condensed it down to about 5 pages of backstory in the actual novel. So I started again from scratch and moved forward. And once I started in that present day, in so there's 3 protagonists, Malamar Veracruz, and she's a butcher. She's a badass mama in El Valle. Like I said, she grew up in the Salton Sea. She's a single mama. She's got 2 daughters. One is in college, Griselda. She's going to UC San Diego for ecological, like earning her master's degree in ecological systems. And then her like precocious, sassy, talkback daughter, Amaranta, who is in high school. And she also is a budding scientist. So once I started in those daughters' voices and really like learned the chemistry of the mother and daughters, and what their concerns were, which is girls are going missing on the Salton Sea, the story just completely took off. And I didn't have to worry so much about an arc, because it was very clear to me, like the story told me what the story was, and I just was able to follow the characters. And I think of this as kind of the mother's journey. It's like the hero's journey, but for me, it's the mother's journey, because I do a lot of work in that place of duende and in that underbelly, which is, if you're not familiar with the concept of duende, it comes from this idea of, oh my goodness, Garcia Lorca. Is that his name? Those of you, it's Lorca. I can't remember if I'm Federico. Somebody please help me. I have brain fog today. But this idea of duende is like doing battle with this like hobgoblin, this like death-like creature, in a kind of a place where that death is imminent. And that's really what it became for me here, with Mal wanting to protect, or needing to protect, would do anything to protect her daughters from what happened to her when her sister went missing when she was a teenager, and the hell that she's lived in. And so the epigraph to the whole novel is from an Evan Boland poem, The Pomegranate. And it's the only story I have ever loved, is the story of a daughter lost and lost and found in hell. And so this place that raised me, where I grew up in the Imperial Valley, is that kind of hellscape for all of the reasons that I just named. And so I didn't have to plot it out once the ball got rolling in this present day and the girls were going missing again. And Mal was doing anything that she could, like everything that she could to protect her daughters, while her daughters were also uncovering parts of the story of what had happened to the missing girls. And they each had a piece that they needed to contribute and to share with each other. But of course, the way that human dynamics work, mother-daughter relationships work, trauma works, and then other characters get involved. They don't actually all get together to connect those pieces until the end of the book. And so that first 150 pages took me about 5 years, and the revision, which was a whole, almost 400 pages, I think, is what the book ended up being before I revised it with my editor, took less than a year. So yeah, when it was like magic once those pieces came together.
And when you all read the book, you'll see it, that you'll hear, you just got the inside scoop of why this is such a nuanced, because it's not didactic. It's not didactic. Everything that Jen just shared comes through in part of the fabric of the story.
Thank you.
No, it really does. I love hearing the inside scoop. So I want to go in two different directions here, and if you want to start throwing questions in the chat, you're welcome to. So let's talk about let's talk about themes for a moment. You have themes of mother and family, secrets, carnage, both emotional and literal. You chose the Mal's profession is a butcher, a whole animal butcher. So talk to us about the process of how did you, because sometimes when I've written something, I look back at it and I think, oh, I didn't realize I dropped those breadcrumbs, but I mean, of course I did. It's the same brain, right? But how intentionally did you create themes and pull on them?
Yeah. So, I mean, just like I was saying about how the art came together from really the background of the place and that underbelly space, that's how it was for everything with the novel. So even in terms of Mal's profession, as I continued researching, we moved to San Diego, which so that my kids could go to an art school there, and it's about 2 hours away from where I grew up. And so we were still going back and visiting, um, because it's much closer than Albuquerque is. And then I'd also been researching for all that time, documentaries, every book I could get on the subject, museum visits, photography books, so all kinds of things. And one of the key components of research for me ended up being this. It was like a environmental advocacy group that is critical of the factory farming and the like corn-fed cows that are at the cattle plant in the Imperial Valley where I grew up. And so I remembered just the stench of the cows and like how there would be thousands upon thousands of cows crammed in together, and like had heard about and really smelled how many cows would die in that environment. And then I found out, for instance, that like Costco buys their beef from cattle plants like this one, and that there had been, like, during COVID, just some serious health violations, and the way that the workers are treated, often undocumented workers. And so like it went, the corruption went deep. And upon reading more about it, I mean, this is all just behind the scenes, but I realized that I had gone to school, like like Catholic school, when I was in elementary school, with one of the current owners of the plant. And so I
Oh,
had this personal experience,
oh,
and not with being a butcher. I mean, that's something that I knew nothing about before I started writing, but just a deep sense of moral responsibility and to raise awareness as awareness had been raised in myself. And again, wanted to do it in such a way that was not didactic. And a lot of this too comes from that poetry background, because it's a like a craft technique that I'd learned over the years, not to just hit the reader over the head, because it's so easy to do in a poem. It's such a short space, and so if you're hitting the reader over the head, like they feel it double or triple. And so this was something that I wanted to build organically into the story. And so I learned everything that I could about butchering, and it became so interesting to me, especially when I started looking up female butchers, because that's an aspect of the field that is not as prominent, but there are, very skilled and crafted women butchers. And so I started like watching videos and interviewing women who owned their own butcher shops, if you will, or different businesses. And that part of Maul's identity became such an integral aspect of how she saw the world, going through her own trauma with her mom, who is abusive, and in the way that she mothers her daughters as a single mom. And then I realized that then it was a symbol. And so again, it wasn't necessarily intentional. And as I went through that first draft, and I just wrote, my heart. But then as all of these themes started to emerge, then I would go back in and purposefully in each draft make sure that I was honing them to their clearest and sharpest resonance. And so for instance, one of those then is the hunting that she did with her puppy, with her father, as Indigenous people, and what he taught her about how to treat the animals that she hunted and killed for food and sustenance. He's a fish and game warden also for the Salton Sea by trade. And so all of that aspect of her culture and of her identity, then, paralleling the women and girls who have gone missing and or murdered on the Salton Sea, and how the disrespect that girls and women are treated with. And so that's something that fellow Indigenous readers were asking me about, in terms of my perspective. And it was like, I just went into this novel knowing how important the land is, knowing how we have mistreated the land and have been mistreated on the land as marginalized people, as Indigenous and Latino communities. And I wanted to let people know what was happening. But I also just really wanted to speak the voices and the stories and the relationships, the human moments, the daily moments of my community, because this is not it's called Abandoned America. Like, America has abandoned our communities in many regards, for as long as like since colonization, but we are thriving in many regards in terms of culture, in terms of food, in terms of care and respect for each other. And so I wanted that to come through. So for instance, that's just Maul's career and how it ties into her culture and the land and her family. It's just one example of what ended up happening magically, I say, or through spirit, because I really opened myself up as a conduit, and because I did the work and I did the research and I talked to people. I talked to all of my family and friends from El Valle as I was writing over 7 or 8 years. And so I feel like I opened myself up, and I did the work, and I did the work again and again. And I feel very proud of all of the connections that I made in that time. Now, my newest novel, I will say I've only had, because I'm on deadline, I've only had 15 months from inception of like dreaming up the idea until I just turned in the final revision to my editor. And so I feel like everything I learned from this 8-year stretch of salt bones, I was then able to compress, and I replicated the process as best I could. I mean, but the thing about magic is that it's not always replicable, but I took as many of the components as I could. And so I do feel like it doesn't always have to take nearly a decade for each project. It just so happened that salt bones needed that time to grow.
Thank you. So we have a question from Jillian that ties into when I said I had a bifurcated set of questions. So how did you know or decide a novel was the right format versus a poem or short story? What made this be a novel for you? And I want to tack on my own question about how your work as a poet informed the lyricism that flows through Salt Bones, and I also am curious if you have to intentionally go through and punch up the imagery, or if that's just a poet free gift.
So most of my books come out as a book of poetry and a novel, and I don't choose between should I write this material as a poem or should I write it as a novel. I have both available to me, and it just depends on the day and time that I'm writing, in terms of dealing with chronic illness, and also having, I'm raising my children and having a day job. I adjunct at the community college, and then I also sometimes teach in MFA programs as a visiting professor. And so, some days I have less time, less energy, or I wake up in the morning and a poem is just there. And so I absolutely listen to whatever story, whatever voice, whatever muse, if you will, speaks to me at the time. And I don't try to fit the work into a genre. I just open myself up and what is available to me. And if I have much more to say, much more of a story, it becomes a novel. So like I said, with that 150 pages, first with that short story, and then with that, really long and ponderous, but necessary time in the underbelly with that 150 pages, it very well, those first pages could have turned into anything, because they were more character sketches and voice driven, very lyrical, sometimes poems. And so it really could have turned itself into anything that it needed to become. I mean, if I needed to, even memoir, because so much of it I draw from my mom's story, my grandma's story, my own story. And so I could have gone any direction with it. But these particular characters came to me, and my as I said, I utilized my agent's advice, and it became a novel. And I think also that was a challenge to myself, because my first couple of novels, Trinity Site, Jubilee, and River Woman, River Demon, have each tackled certain genre elements, always with literary, always with lyricism. But my first one is kind of a post-apocalypse with a twist. My second is very literary, Bildungsroman, coming of age. That was actually the first I ever wrote. Didn't get published. And so I wrote the second one, sent it out, and both novels got picked up together with an option for the third. and then the third became more of a murder mystery. And so there was actually a moment on the beach. Like I said, we moved to San Diego, and my husband and my kids had just started their art school. My husband and I were sitting on the beach together, and the water there, at the very Imperial Beach at the very bottom of San Diego, right by the border, was toxic, was filled with wastewater and sewage, unfortunately. And I hadn't known that at the time, and had gone too close to the water and got virulently sick for several days. And so it was like a literal battle with duende, like death was near. And I had talked to my husband about this. I said, should I go the way of, more memoir and journalism? I don't really know what I'm doing there, but maybe I should. Maybe I owe it to the story. Should I go the way of, very literary, very poetic, very lyric, just like my heart? And I don't have to learn or stretch very much. I just get to write what I know and who I am. But there's a third option, because I feel like I've done this so many times. I've written many poetry books, and most of my novels before, are in that format. And I felt like my platform, if you will, my um, oh my gosh, I want to say milk crate, but that's not what it's called. Standing on my
Box.
soapbox. Yes, thank you. Milk crate, soapbox. Um, is rickety, and I didn't really know much about building a platform as a poet. I mean, like, a famous poet is a misnomer, right? But we love each other, and so I thought, people love murder mysteries, right? Like, they're everywhere. So I decided there on that beach, right before I got virulently sick, that I would wrap my heart in a murder mystery. And I think that was absolutely the moment that I decided that it would be this novel in this form. Um, and like I said, I mean, once that missing and murdered girls and women, Indigenous girls and women, became a part of it, which was something that I was also very concerned about, seeing women, as you saw in the prologue, disappeared and not getting the attention in the media, or really anywhere, which it's changing now, thank goodness. But when I started writing this 8 years ago, it was like there was just so little concern for all of the girls and women who'd gone missing. So once that component became a part of it, the ball started rolling for me. And so I knew that it was the right format. I think that if it had been as stalling and halting as the first few years had been, because I really wasn't in the right form. I don't want to say genre, because I don't necessarily believe in genre. I think that that's a publishing term that, what the publisher will then try to figure out how to sell you. And so what boxes do they cram you into? But I think that as writers, if we can free ourselves as much as we can from those boxes, it'll serve us better. At the same time, though, knowing that there are certain forms that are going to lend themselves best to what we need to say when we need to say it in this moment. And for me, that was really bridging the ecological swan song, which would be all my poems, with, right, the mother and daughter heart, which would be the literary, psychological, emotional, relationship driven, character driven aspect. So and those are the two that I was the most comfortable with, and I could write just any day, every day, for hours a day, and to my heart's content. But when I brought in that third component of the murder mystery, which I had to teach myself rigorously, I had to study, read every book I could about the craft, about actual murder mysteries that were doing this well, and then bring all of those together. I feel like, okay, I hit on something special now, and really feel proud of and feel excited about every time I come to the page.
Thank you. So, Deb, I'm going to get to your question in a moment, because there's a question that's related to the poetry talk, which is, I'm a poet who started writing prose. I'm starting a mystery novel and struggling with brevity. So standard novel is 75 to 90,000 words. I'm only about halfway that number. How do you expand when you're trained as a poet to be concise and economical with your words?
Oh, that's such a great question, and I'm going to
Isn't
try
it?
to answer it. However, I will put the caveat here that you are talking to the wrong poet. Because, okay, I mean, I fell in love with Patricia Smith's Sonnet Crown in her poetry collection, would have been Jimmy Savannah. And I was like, what is this thing doing? It's like a mini novel in verse. So a sonnet crown is the last, and there are variations on it, but the one that I'm familiar with, the last line of each sonnet then becomes the first line of the next sonnet. And then there are 14 of them, and there might be a 15th, which is then the last first line of each sonnet. and it comes together as a whole to create this story. So then you have like it's kind of like contrapuntal in that way, where you have braided narrative, or two or more things living side by side, and that you have the container of each sonnet on its own, but then when brought together in conjunction with all of these other sonnets, comes to make this greater whole. And I just loved that so much. Or even like the villanelle or the sestina with the repetitions. And I would, it's a lot of times these kind of forms can become very stale very quickly because you repeat lines over and over throughout the poems. But what I often tell myself and tell fellow poets or writers trying out these forms, if you put a story in there, that's the engine. It's going to drive itself, and it's not going to become redundant. It's not going to become repetitive, because the story is going to unfold the way that story does. And so there is something magical for me about long-windedness and just seeing where the story unravels if you let go. And that for me is therapeutic emotionally, and in terms of healing from trauma, both personal and generational. And so that ties into all of my goals for writing, in terms of, advocating for my communities and for marginalized people, for advocating for myself as a woman, as a mother, as a fat brown Latina on the border, for instance. And so I just have so many ideas and so many things that I want to say, and it's always like finding the container for them. And so the novel for me allows it just, I mean, that really, I was going to say allows something, but I think that's the sentence in itself. It allows. And in poetry, we're often told, like, tighten it, and what is it, not necessarily what does it mean, but kind of, I mean, like, in terms of like making sure that you've said something in that short space. But with a novel, at least in the first draft, and really with all of my poems, the way that I write to discover what it is that I want to say. So, and I see that you're nodding, Amy. Yes, right, exactly.
Totally.
Robert Frost said that a poem is like a piece of ice on a hot stove, and it rides its own melting. And that's really any piece of writing for me. It's just going to ride its own melting and see where it goes. I had something else to say, but I hope that helps. Oh, I remember that one other person just said something recently that I loved. John Manuel Arias. He wrote a beautiful novel that it's about fire, and I can't remember what it's called right now, but I love it. It's gorgeous. John Manuel Arias is a poet and a novelist. If anyone can find his book and put it in the chat, I'd be so grateful. But he just said something beautiful the other day on his Instagram, if you want to go look him up, about how readers will sometimes ask about, where, and I think he was kind of writing tongue in cheek and kind of annoyed with reviews that he'd been reading. And I've actually turned Goodreads as like a naughty website on my computer and my phone. So I can't access Goodreads anymore because I need to stay away from reviews. They bring out just all of my demons. But I think maybe John was reading reviews and responding to them. But so it's like readers asking, like, how did this move the story forward? And this is like, that's an idea that we've heard. Like, how do we move the narrative forward? How do we drive the narrative? About plot and engine and all of that. And, it's like this idea that there's this idea that readers have, or publishers have, or, that MFA programs will teach you that, that the story is like a rocket ship, and it's taking you to a destination through space. And he says, no, the novel is the whole goddamn galaxy where there was fire. Yes, exactly. John Manuel Arias is wonderful. And I hope you'll read his books. He has a new one coming out this year or next year, very soon. And that's how I think of really any form, but especially the novel. It's the whole galaxy. And so you are at about, let's see, you said you're at about halfway, so 30,000 words. You know, dig into the past, dig into the characters. Maybe there are other characters that need to come forth. Like I really believed in the beginning that this was Mal's story, which it is, but then, oh my goodness, I didn't even know she had two daughters because I was in her childhood. And so I knew she was going to have a daughter. I have a daughter, but as I dug into the story and listened to her and her family and then, you know, then her other daughter emerged. And then I haven't even told you all about La Ciguanaba. So La Ciguanaba is this character who comes into the novel, and she came to me this way, just began haunting me. She is a horse-headed woman from Latin American, primarily Mexican and Central American mythology. And she is this, like, from the back, just like totally gorgeous, lures men. And then she turns around and she's got this horse head and terrifies them and, you know, kills them essentially. What I had heard about her was that either she goes after wayward men, like drunkards, womanizers, you know, out in the middle of the night doing things they shouldn't do, or strangely enough, girls, specifically like children and girls, like La Llorona. I'm obsessed with La Llorona. I write about her all the time. I couldn't let her into this story full force because literally every other book that I've written is like centered on La Llorona in some way. But my daughter had started horseback riding. And so I was around horses all the time. The smell, like you will see that the smell is so prominent. That's a sense that we don't utilize enough in our writing, but it's so evocative and it brings back memories and it just puts us in place, you know, sets us in a place. And so I was there with the horses all the time, and La Ciguanaba began to haunt me. I had no idea when I started writing the book, that 150 pages, so maybe where you are right now, that La Ciguanaba was going to become a major influence. And so just like digging into Mal's psychology and why La Ciguanaba is haunting her, as well as the cultural and historical reasons that she might be haunting her, as well as the political reasons and the socioeconomic reasons. So for instance, what she has to do with solving the mystery of what's happening to the girls and women. And so digging in at each of these places, and you know, they won't all be fruitful to the story necessarily. You'll probably end up cutting some out, but you just start writing into them and allow, and then you're going to find like which threads need then more expansion in the work. Does that help? Yay. I love that
So
question.
we're getting close to wrapping up. So I want to ask one more question from the, let's be putting away my notes. One more question from the chat and then one more question from me. So Deb has asked about the process of turning the book into an audiobook. And I'm seeing more and more questions about this in these craft chats. So how did that happen?
Yeah, oh, that's such a great question. And people love audiobooks. I love reading them, especially with my family and especially on car trips and things like that. And so I think that as writers, considering how audiobooks can come into our writing will behoove us. So I'm lucky enough that my major publishers for my novels already had an audiobook component. And I'll tell you about that in a little bit as well. But I also want to say that I did make an audiobook for one of my poetry collections as well, because I wanted that oral component of it. We think about going to poetry readings, going, you know, in this kind of environment. Thank you all for being here and listening to me speak. And I feel like there is something primordial and powerful and magical about the, you know, speaking and listening component of our words. And so it was important to me to make that. And I just commissioned a friend that I had found here in Albuquerque had the equipment to make an audiobook, and worked with him in that process, and went through, I believe it was Amazon's platform. And I do understand that there are problems, and you know, that there are some problematic elements of working with Amazon, but I also considered the ease of use for myself as a tech newbie, and accessibility for people. And so that's where I ended up going with making my own. And there are probably a lot of better resources out there for you, but it's totally doable. In terms of working with my novels, and specifically with Salt Bones, the publisher found 3 narrators and had them each read the first chapter. So not the prologue, but the first chapter in Malamar's voice. And it was so fun to see, because there's a part of me as a poet who, has all of these years of experience of reading my work aloud. So there was a major part of me that wanted to ask, and I know that some writers do this, to narrate my own book. But I thought, with all of my books, there is something else powerful and magical and special about the work interpreted and like having another kind of a life in someone else's voice. And so I thought, how wonderful and what a privilege and an honor. So, and just how fun too, to get to hear, a character that came out of me in some way and then like birthed into this world, then become inhabited fully, in a different voice. And so it just teaches me something to hear my work read in someone else's, inflections and pronunciations and tone of voice and all of that. And so listen to the 3 samples with my family for all various aspects, like, how much of Mal's like badassery, like she's a butcher, and and she's just like so cool, but also, she's tender, and also like the pronunciations on the border where I grew up, and the inflections of, like Southern California Spanglish versus, any other that you might hear across the United States, and how much of an authentic experience I wanted for my readers, or for my listeners. And so all of those came into it, like just, how fast were they reading? How slow were they reading? How breathless were they reading? All of those, like, just what was I feeling? And my husband and my son and daughter were listening as well, and like listened over a few days, a few times, and came to the consensus of Victoria Villarreal. Oh wait, actually, I'm sorry that I don't remember. My brain fog is so terrible today, but she's a wonderful, wonderful narrator. Please go see it. It might be Villanueva. And it might be Villanueva. Anyway, so it's just really fun to hear it from her perspective. And then I ended up finding out that one of my aunts, for instance, is dyslexic, she told me, and she doesn't read, but she was so excited. She doesn't read on the page, but she was so excited to find out that she could read my book because it was available on audiobook. So I encourage you all to ask your publishers if they have this available, and if not, to find out, if how possible it would be for you to do this on your own. So thank you for that question. I didn't actually work with the narrator. Other than that, like, I gave some pronunciations, and so I recorded myself saying certain words, mostly in the Kahiwa and Kumaye languages that I grew up hearing on the border. Those are the indigenous peoples that are from the place where I grew up, as well as the Spanglish. And and other than that, it was kind of like just gave, opened my heart and gave my story away. I was asked about which music for the intro and outro music, and that was, again, really cool. There were 3 possibilities, and so listening to that, and we chose one that was kind of like a combination of Western with very like Mexican, like guitar, and evoked for me that sense of like the white cowboy culture that kind of came with colonization, and then the Mexican community that I grew up with there. So I felt like even just getting to choose the music from those 3 samples allowed me to think about and inhabit the work in an interesting and new way. And so those are the things, like I curate playlists, for instance, when I'm creating each novel, and then I make those available online. And so, for instance, you can go into my link tree or to my website and find those playlists. And so all of these different ways of like sensory ways of entering the book. For me as a writer, I then like to make sure are available for readers as well. So like there's a recipe in the book club kit on my website as well for a tres leches cake, which is one of my absolute favorites. Mal makes it in the book. It becomes a symbol, very special to her, and becomes like a plot element as well. And so I made that accessible to you readers as well. So thank you.
Last question. Do you have one piece of advice for writers just starting out?
Yes. Never, ever, ever give up on your heart. You are called to write this story for a reason. Right now, your voice, your story, your truths matter so much. Now, always now, more than ever. And it's hard. It's hard to sit down and write every day or as often as you can, as long as you feel, like those of us dealing with chronic illness. There are days that I just have to rest. There are weeks that I just have to rest. And I forgive myself and I offer grace for myself. And I know that the writing will be there for me, as much as I can do or as little as I can do. But it is hard. But just never, ever, ever give up on your heart. And if that means that your novel is a novella at 150 pages because that is your heart and you've done it and you've done like it's as a perfect of a creation as you I'm going to say can make it, but like I feel like it's such a magical process. And so then finding champions and advocates who will see that and see you and like don't feel like, so even as much as the advice that I gave before about how you can stretch and grow and allow, at the same time sometimes we also have to push back at the powers that be, at the ivory towers and all of the gatekeepers and all of that. And so that novella might be a piece in itself, or it might go along with your poems or with your short stories or with other components. And so, for instance, oh my goodness, Luisa Valeria, I believe. I can find this for you, but she is a part of a project on the border of creating sounds from the border, and it's like this creative piece that is it's like an audiobook, but it's just composed of like conversations and train sounds and nature sounds and things like that. And so was there a place for that in the publishing world before her and her team created this? I have no idea, but they created it and they made a place for it. And so your piece, whatever that is, hybrid, a short novel like Fahrenheit 451 is like 150 pages or something. And it's a major piece of American literature. So also don't give up and don't be bullied by whomever is telling you that you should. I tell my kids and I'm so crass, don't shit on me and I won't shit on you. And so that's how I am as a writer. It's like, this is what I have to write and help me, it's like finding your agent and your editor. It was a magical, again, I've said that word 100 times tonight. It was a magical experience that everybody said no to Jubilee. Like all the publishers, major and indie, said no to Jubilee until I wrote the second novel. Like I said, got it published. And then major New York editor, vice president of one of the big five, was on a subway reading my little novel. I have no idea how she found it. And she said she was just crying on the subway on her way to work and emailed me and said, I loved your character. I loved her story. And what else are you writing? I was writing Salt Bones. So, you just write what you have to write and don't give up on it. And your people are going to come to you. It's like, if you build it, they will come. I believe it. I really, because I'm living proof of it. Thank you all so much for these beautiful questions and hanging out with me tonight.
And thank you so much for sharing so generously of your heart. It was an absolute pleasure. Buy the book, people, buy the book, and then email me and thank me. Thank Jen, but thank me. All right, take care. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Bye.